You're going to, oh, it is working. You're going to need a piece of paper. And before I start, I want to thank Theo. When I grow up, I want to be as smart as that man. So we're going to talk about design thinking and how it could be used to change the way we do schools. There's a new topic for me. Let's talk about how we might change the way we do school. But before we do, thank you. There's a little exercise that I'd like us to share that's about a design thinking kind of activity, and I think it'll be useful, so give it a try. What I'd like for you to do is draw professional learning that you love or hate. And by draw, I don't mean a portrait, whatever. Make symbols, make a storyboard, make a collage, do stick figures, whatever. You got 2 minutes to draw on a piece of paper some idea of professional learning that you love or hate, and then you're going to share it with somebody. So take a couple minutes and do your drawing. Okay. You may be done, you may not be done, whatever. Share it with a neighbor or somebody across all the way over there. Tell them about your drawing or just let them look at it and see what they think. You have a minute or two to talk about each other. Make sure you give each other time to talk about it. Okay. Now, trick question. I'd like for you to think about the experience of the drawing. So put aside for a moment what I asked you to draw about. Put aside the thing about professional learning you love or hate. We might come back to that. I hope we do. But what I'd like for you to think about is the experience of drawing what you were thinking and sharing what you drew. Think about the experience of drawing what you were thinking and trying to communicate with the drawing. Anybody have a, what did you get, learn, observe, have trouble with, really like about that experience? Anybody? Very nervous. Yeah, it's nervous. It's tough. It's a challenge for sure. Well, after you tackled the challenge like a Mahatma, what then? Nervous about showing, but also the sense of being in a good company with it. Thank you. Yes?
It's much easier for me to talk while I'm drawing or talk and show than just talk.
Yes, the combination of the drawing and the talking. Did it change for you? Did it change the way you were able to articulate the ideas that you... Yeah. Thank you. Interesting. Yes? So it's exciting. It became kind of a synergy in a way, the drawing and the talking. Nice point. Who else? Yes, I like that. You sure you want to talk? Nice point. Excellent point. Excellent point. That's going to come up later. Okay, one more comment about the drawing itself. The act of drawing as a way of thinking. Yes? How do you mean metaphorical? Nice word, by the way. This is complex for me. I'm trying to use the word metaphor. So the metaphor is that you are changing, by changing the act, you're changing the thinking, in a way, about what professional learning is. Am I correctly understanding? Oh, very interesting. Nice. Okay. Thank you very much for engaging in this exercise. I'm going to move on. Hold on to these thoughts about this experience. It's going to come up again. So I'm going to talk about design thinking. I'm sure that in one way or another, everybody is at least familiar with the concept. That people, because it's all the rage now, primarily because of the STEM development that's going on in K-12. And I'm not going to try to explicate design thinking. I'm going to try to talk about what I think are some pretty interesting, promising ideas that come out of the protocol and the habits of mind that are related. So I assume that everybody is at least familiar with the idea, the concept. I assume that some of you actually know a fair amount about it. I'm not going to try to educate you about design thinking. And I assume that some of you are even using it. How many people are actually using design thinking in one way or another? Oh, vast numbers. All right. Well, so we'll learn a lot from each other today. Okay, that's useful. And I always like it when people don't know a whole lot about a subject I'm talking about, because then it's hard to know just how foolish I really am. Okay, so let's talk about it. Here's just the most basic layout of the protocol. There are two primary models that have dominated the landscape. One from the Stanford D School has 5 phases: empathize, define, ideate, prototype, test. That's probably the most common model being used in K-12. It's the one I hear about anyway, the most. Another model is called I think it's IDEO model, and that's used more out in the real world, at least the non-academic world, and is in a way kind of a more multicultural, inviting model. They talk about it in terms of 3 phases: hear, create, and deliver. And I've intentionally aligned these because here pretty much goes with empathize, create with define and ideate, prototype and test with deliver. Okay, I'm not going to go into all these phases in detail. You can get an idea that there's phases, you're kind of defining or understanding the problem, and then you're looking at it more clearly, and then you're prototyping and testing. Okay, that's design thinking. That's the protocol. It's used for wicked problems, meaning problems that don't readily lend themselves to a solution, and it is about a spiral. So it's not like you start at one and then finish at the other. Like inquiry, when you get to the end, you're really starting again. It's a continual process. All right, here's an interesting way to look at it. This comes from IDEO. They have a timeline, that's the horizontal line, and then they have the vertical line goes from concrete to abstract. And they list particular kinds of activities or behaviors that occur as one goes through the design thinking phases. You start with observations. This is very important. Notice that they're not starting just with, oh, let's think about the problem. They're starting with, let's observe. Let's hear stories. Let's hear what our clients, what the potential users are interested in, what they're thinking about, what they're concerned about. It's a very different way of thinking about problems. And then they move through themes to opportunities. Instead of thinking in terms of problems, they try to think more in terms of what the opportunities are. Like, oh, kids are having trouble behaving properly when they're in the lunchroom. Instead of thinking of that as a problem, perhaps that's an opportunity for thinking about the school culture and conversations about the school culture. It shifts the way the thinking occurs. Then moving into solutions and prototypes and implementation. It's an interesting way of looking at it. This is an experience I had in a workshop where I got my introduction to design thinking. So we first did an interview with clients. We were supposed to design a wallet. We were given a simple problem because at the intro workshop, they didn't think we could handle more complex ones. They were probably right. And so we did interviews and we wrote down notes about what we thought the client was really interested in, what she wanted. One of the things we learned from the interview was that the wallet was at least as much an emotional holder for her as it was a physical holder. So that it held, literally, she held in her wallet keepsakes that were about how she felt about things. Well, we hadn't really thought about that before. So in this very banal exercise, we learned a lot about the person and about the process of design. This was our first prototype. We had 5 minutes to build it. Pretty handsome wallet, don't you think? These pipe cleaners are actually energy waves coming out of this little digital physical wallet. And the sticky notes are actually holographic images. They represent holographic images, so that when she opened her wallet, instead of stuff flying out, holographic images flew out so that she could see what she had, and then she could just touch one, and that would actually then pop out the thing that she wanted. That was our prototype idea, or at least one of our prototype ideas. You get the idea about it opens up thinking. All right, here's the most important part. Design thinking primarily is not about the protocol, the phases, even though, of course, especially in school, that's what we emphasize. It's primarily about habits of thinking. And it changes habits of thinking from the more critical thinking that we're used to a more inventive thinking. So, and I've only listed a few of the habits, but some of the ones that stick out for me. Learning from the client, observing, listening. So imagine, for example, if in school, every time we thought about something that needed to be changed, the first thing we did was talk with our clients, our kids, and ask them, well, how's this feel? What's this experience like for you? What are your goals and ambitions? What are your desires? If that were the first thing we did in a thinking about a problem-solving kind of process. Second, to seek diverse contributions. Well, of course, we all want to seek diverse contributions, but it's easier to say than to do. And that's related a lot to this idea of yes and, which I have down here at the bottom. In other words, in schools, we have a tendency to say yes, but, Theo mentioned that. You know, we want those kids to seek the horizons, but we are perpetually saying to them, yes, but, in the meantime, design thinking very much emphasizes yes and. I'll come back to that in a second. A third principle is show, not tell, which I've tried to show. Thank you very much. And a fourth principle, I learned a lot from show, not tell, which is that I have a tendency to be a talker, to be a person who always is going to say or write what it is that I'm thinking about. In design thinking, it really helps a lot to draw, back to our experience at the beginning of this little talk, it helps a lot to draw because it changes the way we think and it changes the way people understand what we think. And it opens up new possibilities. So, very simple principle that can change a lot. And a fourth principle is build to think, test to learn. Don't think you have one solution and then you're going to implement it. Think, oh, let's try this. Let's experiment and learn from the experiment and then build on that. Each proposed solution leads to another idea. So those are just 4 of the habits of mind. Imagine, forget the protocol. Forget the steps. Imagine we did those 4 habits and we made those central to what we do every day. Back to the improv and design, yes and point. Design has a lot to do with improv. I don't know if folks are familiar with improv principles, but that's what's listed here, tenets of improv. It's interesting to me because we tend to think about improv as this kind of like random, people are up there just doing stuff and then just responding spontaneously to whatever comes up. But in fact, improv has very strong principles. Like chaos, it seems to be random and disorderly, but in fact is based on a fundamental order. And design thinking is also based on that same kind of similar order, as I would argue is learning. Okay, now I'm going to ask you to do a little more reflective thinking about the things that I've been saying. So, imagine potential ways we might use this design thinking, the protocols and the habits. Maybe in lesson in unit planet, maybe in behavior policies, maybe in changing the learning community culture. Imagine it were going to be used. You were going to lead its use in your school or in your district. How might things change? Talk amongst each other about that for a minute. Okay, let's share a couple of thoughts. How might things change if we use these kinds of habits and protocols? How might schooling change? Or just your classroom, or your school? Bueller? More field trips? Why? Why do you say that, Dave? So out there, actually doing stuff, having experiences. Okay. How else? Yes. Ah, not only to it, I would argue, not only to admit failure, but to embrace it. We talk about that all the time in school, but we don't really practice it. But this is really a protocol that invites you to fail. Fail forward. Yeah, great point. Yes.
We talked about it like that earlier talk where the kids joined up with the city council.
Yes.
Did the park. If they're invested in it, they will take care of it, they will use it.
And that's a great example. They talked to the city council about the park. The park mattered to them. They were immediately engaged. They were both clients and designers. That's a rich experience in many kinds of ways. Great call. And that would be a powerful kind of learning. Anybody else? Yeah. Yeah, can I ask my students to help design the lesson or the unit? Ooh, I remember one time I was reminded today, in fact, about I was a volleyball coach for a very brief period of time. I didn't know diddly about playing volleyball, but they needed somebody. Probably nobody else has ever had that experience. You know, you're the guy. I coached the JV team, thank the gods. The girls knew way more about volleyball than I did, way more. Did it even occur to me, hey, how should we run the practice? No, it didn't occur to me. How should we? Years later, I thought, oh, I got an idea. Yeah, well, wouldn't that be wonderful if we really learn how to help engage our kids in the design of their own learning experiences? What a powerful learning that would be for all of us. Well, I just wanted to open this up as a possibility. I think that if we embrace these habits, regardless of whether we use this protocol, regardless of whether we're doing STEM, if we embrace these habits, we can change the culture of learning in our classrooms, in our schools, and we can create the kind of possibilities that Theo talked about.